All right, I thought I would make a video because I had a flash of inspiration, and it comes from my own attempts to combine Christianity with Jungianism and so on. And basically, what I've run into is the problem of a mere mortal trying to be the be-all, end-all truth of all things. And it turns out only God can do that. The gist of this video is going to be, it takes all kinds to make the world go round, but also there is right and there is wrong in the world that's real. And generally speaking, my experience is there's a plurality of ways of being that are legitimate, but they're technically limited. They're technically limited. And the purpose of the right wing is to be dominant and normative, and the purpose of the left wing is to be varied and explore the outliers and so on. By this standard, I am naturally a leftist, although I've been supporting the right wing pretty heavily. But I thought I would also get into infantile or undeveloped left and right, and veteran or blooded left and right. And basically, the boomers, the hippies are the infantile left, and the boomers in general are infantile right. And what woke is it's infantile left. The old right, the Bush conservatives and so on are the infantile right. And what we're looking at is, if Richard IV is correct, the Great Reawakening, where the legitimacy of left and right is going to improve on both ends eventually. Now, currently, like I said, I support the right heavily and so on, but I'm probably naturally a leftist, which is a damning indictment of woke and everything it stands for and so on, that a natural leftist can look at that and go, no, that's totally evil, sick, and disgusting, and I can't support it. Whatever's against it, I must support. But that's not to say there's no place for the left at all. The left is naturally the part of the margins and the fringes of society, but they need to be put into their place, both in the sense of like stomping down on a little bit in one way, but also like providing a place of honor for them as well, right? So it's when they're too uppity, you stomp on them, but when they know their place finally, you give them honors for their part in society. And the goal and quest for people is to find their proper place in the world, for everyone, basically. To that extent, a really simplistic way of describing this is that right-wingers need Carl Jung and left-wingers need Jesus Christ. There's two different ways of going about things and so on, which is you're honing your strengths or you're fleshing out your weaknesses. And both need to be done by as many people as possible, basically, for society to be well off and so on. Your exact position in the order and world and the state of your being and so on is an individual expression, but it must be partially unified to the whole and the collective, while also expressing yourself as an individual. And the arguments up until recently have been how to manifest both as much as possible and which one is superior and so on. What I want to say is that some people are naturally leftist and Jungian, Carl Jung, and some people are naturally right-wing and Christian. Another way of putting it is Christianity is for selfish people, Jung is for self-sacrificing people. There's a certain drift towards the center when you use them. And one of the things that I came up with is the thought that C.S. Lewis is naturally a leftist who found Christ, and Carl Jung is naturally a right-winger who discovered paganism and leaned into that as an offset to their natural disposition, strengths, and weaknesses for the fleshing out part. You have to pick in the end Christ or Jung for your guidance star, but for a good long time you'll find that there's a certain degree of compromise and mutual agreement between the two on the good life and how to live it and so on. And when you study it deeply, when you really get into like the Red Book and Christian apologetics and thoughts like C.S. Lewis or Thomas Aquinas or St. Augustine and so on, or Carl Jung and who else on the left? I'm not sure, but at the moment I'm not sure. But anyways, Joseph Campbell, let's say, and Jung, and C.S. Lewis and Aquinas on the other side. Kierkegaard was one to wrestle with this problem and so on. And the goal is basically there's this fighting game metaphor for mastering things, where it's like when you start a fighting game, you play all the characters and you find your favorite one after not knowing anything about any of them. So you pick one character and you develop it. And then what happens is you start playing other characters and they start developing into the one that you're best at, sort of. And then slowly, by integrating the knowledge of the relationships between the various fighters, you up your game with all the fighters eventually. But there's like a base level where you don't know anything. There's like a singular push in one domain. Then related domains kind of improve. And you gotta, like, it's a bit of focus on those related domains a little bit, and also a little bit of synergistic sort of like, because you know the one, you know the others a little bit better, element to it. And then you sort of flesh out the rest of them up until your peak mastery at all levels, basically. And you'll probably always have one character you're strongest with and your favorite and so on. And it might not have to be the strongest and the favorite at the same time, but you get my drift. Roughly speaking, that's how to do it. And the goal of leftists need Christ and right-wingers need Jung is so that they understand each other's natural dispositions better. Once there's this relationship between left and right that's actually not like at each other's throats all the time, then basically you've got a really well-run society. Now granted, woke is very infantile and immature and bratty and selfish and prickish and so on. So that's not what I'm talking about here. What I'm talking about is what I want to call the new legitimate left. And some people would fall into the trap of trying to make it the one be-all truth of everything and so on, but only God is that. No single person, no group of people can be that. You can be somewhat related as a group to that, but not entirely. There's always going to be the individual case of a human being who is not perfect and not everything. And it doesn't matter how big the group of people is, even if it's all of humanity, you can't be all things all the time. It's just impossible, even for all of humanity combined. but you can be a relatively indicative sample of all things, or most things, or many things, basically. And that's up to your interpretation. So again, it takes all kinds to make the world go round, but there's a definite right and a definite wrong as well. And that brings me to my next point, which is objective and subjective value and goodness and worth and so on. Individual people can differ from each other in their intrinsic drives and motivations and personalities and dispositions and biases, strengths and weaknesses and so on. And I would make the mistake on purpose to err on the side of objective good, but also not to confuse it with subjective good or vice versa, but to accept and acknowledge that objective good is not always your subjective good. And personally, like I said, it doesn't have to be everyone, but personally, I would suggest more people err on the side of objective good. Because when enough people critical mass for the objective good of their collective, then, everyone's taken care of on some level. But there's a certain degree of, a foundation can only be built so high based on the solidity of the foundation before everything collapses. And you don't want to overextend to the point of collapse. So don't run with the ball all the distance chasing the sun of collective good. That is a very bad thing to do. And personal selfishness and only my good and I don't care about anyone else is also a bad thing. Everything is a navigation of those basic premises and so on. So, while I would personally make the mistake on the side of objective good if I could, I would definitely leave a lot of room for a subjective good as well. Something that is meaningful to me personally on a certain level, and actually is what I want, versus what I know is good for others. And maybe that other even includes yourself in the future, 2 months from now or something. That's that forward-thinking sort of the opposite of the Homer Simpson attitude of that's a problem for future me, and I don't care about him. The opposite of that, basically. But at the same time, because there's a tension. And when you think of the left and right brain, as per Ian McGilchrist, there's also an element of left brain rational thinking, logical processes and steps, and integrated, fluctuating relationships on a complex level that's more holistic but less detailed than the left brain. The left brain is details, the right brain is whole picture, is the simplest way to put it. It might be more complicated than that for me and McGilchrist, but he's a very good person to look into and so on. And left and right brain does not correlate entirely with left or right politics, by the way. But the problem is we're in a very left brain society that has to dissect everything completely. And I share that problem. They say schizophrenia makes you more left brain, and your right brain kind of suffers. And apparently I've got it, so that's very typical. And I'm also autistic, so that's very left brain oriented too. So I kind of had to power through life's big questions with a very autistic worldview and so on. Doubly autistic, in fact, or something like that, like a schizo and autist, left brain, kind of both left brain things at the same time. Well, left brain over here. So one of the things I've discovered is if you're a mystic, or if you want to become a mystic, and you're left brain oriented, then you need to study Christ and the apologetics and the explanations for the nuance of the Bible. You need to study Carl Jung, and you should probably study Ian McGilchrist as well. And basically one of the problems with philosophers is they obsess about the one truth of everything for everyone at all times. And that's a critical weakness, and so on. Now, the great debate between right and left is singular unity for the right, or plurality, variety for the left. And everyone's struggling over which one has to be the only one thing to exist and so on at the moment, which is the reason why we have so much trouble. The answer to that is really that there's a plurality that's limited, but there's a lot of wiggle room in that limitation. Not everything is acceptable, but there's a wide, a variety within that limitation that is acceptable. And the infantile element to the left currently is that the left is trying to be unifying while also being variety oriented. And the right, if you notice, has a lot of variety while declaring itself the unifying force. And currently, the reason why I support the right is because the right has a better vision of plurality at the moment for collective good, while tolerating individual incarnations of how to be better than the left and so on. I don't know the exact, there's no necessarily exact rule set or principles or axioms or something like that that defines the good right versus the bad left necessarily entirely, as far as I can tell, other than they believe in objectivity on some level, and objectivity is shareable, subjectivity is expressible, and shareable naturally already occurring things, like math, for instance, right? The rule of 2 + 2 = 4 is true in all situations. Versus the my truth, your truth, and so on. You need a reliable, shareable foundation for a communal species to have a good society. It's our biggest strength, and it's also why we need to keep it going so that we have good lives. Individual expression can exist, and it does exist, but shareable, communal aspects to truth. And I don't mean like we all agree so therefore it's true. I mean stuff that's true no matter what, so you can actually share it because it's always true. Versus true in my situation, individualism is a thing. And we are naturally a communal species, so a little bit of unifying, true in all cases, shareability is actually more important on some level. There needs to be a communal bond and so on. And you see the left trying to navigate itself as that. That whole we are the 99%, even though they're like like 0.1% of the population was actually at the occupied camps and so on. They're trying to navigate that element, and the right is just doing it better at the moment, basically. And what I think is going to happen is the left is going to give up on the communal domination, which is the rightful aspect of the right wing, and turn back to individual exploration and nuance and variety and so on the fringes. And once that happens, the left and right will be able to find peace. Because the thing, if you notice what I was trying to say earlier with the left trying to be the unifying force, is the left is not naturally the unifying force. That is against God's will, basically. That is against the natural order, that is caved in on itself, trying to make up for its own inadequacies and so on. And you could partly understand that it's a rebellion against the atomizing influence of liberalism and so on as an ideology specifically, which is a tool that has run its course mostly for usefulness and so on, because when liberalism first evolved, society was very right-wing, very left-brain, and very strict, let's say. And liberalism at its beginning was an answer to that problem of lack of individual expression as part of the whole. You need the whole and you need individual expression. And when society goes too far in one or the other direction, a natural corrective ideology will emerge to go like this, or like basically, like if you have the center, the golden mean, or Aristotle's happy middle ground, then basically what you see is society kind of going like this, with the line going straight in the middle and so on. So it's like that basically, and it veers left and right over time and so on. And society does really well when you accept the left brain and the right brain, when you accept the individual and the plural and the unified plurality, or something like that is one way to put it, the individual and the collective and so on. And one of the things leftism is so bad at, for a reason, is their idea of a collective unity is it's their weakness. They don't know how to do it properly. The right doesn't know how to do individual expression very well. The left doesn't know how to do collective unity very well. And what you notice is that when they get into those other domains, they tend to screw up a lot. So, one of the correctives I would suggest is, if you are left wing, try to study Christianity from a traditionalist perspective. And if you are right wing, try to understand Carl Jung and what he's getting at with his tidbits. And just accept that at the end of the line, there's going to be a choice to be made. You can compromise basically up until that point. But at the end of the line, you're going to have to choose which side you fall on more relative to the other. And you can totally flesh out your weaknesses with Christianity as a left-winger, or Jungianism as a right-winger. But a choice will have to be made in your individual expression and so on. And which one you fall under is just who you are, basically. But you can flesh out your weaknesses. And this is important because it means you can relate to other people better. And you can appreciate the insights they have better when you actually understand a little bit about how they're actually processing information and so on, and making decisions and experiencing the world and so on. And that's important for our communal species, because the whole point of language and stuff is to communicate purposes and truth and concepts and ways of being and stuff like that accurately to each other so that they understand what each other has experienced, so that we can die in our ideas can die, as Jordan Peterson will put it, so that we don't physically die until much later, because everyone dies eventually, right? Obviously, but you know what I mean. And Jung is probably a right-winger naturally, who discovered paganism and leaned on it to offset his weak biases. And C.S. Lewis is a left-winger probably naturally, who discovered Christianity to offset his biases. So there's two things to remember to this, which is it's totally fine to hone your strengths, but it's also important to flesh out your weaknesses and just know thyself. And at the end of the day, what it comes down to is your personal exact proper balance for objective morality and subjective well-being is going to be different than someone else's. And to accept that, but to explore it and maximize both. So there's a concept called ordered liberty, and there's also a concept called anarcho-tyranny. And anarcho-tyranny is total dysfunction, and ordered liberty is everything's functioning really well. Anarcho-tyranny is the leader is not doing his job, and the outliers are running crazily through the streets, doing terrible things. And ordered liberty is the order of a good leader, and the citizenry, for instance, is doing and experiencing lots of good. So there's a certain value judgment to be made that's objective about the results of how you try and order the world, but there's also a plurality element to it as well, objective and subjective. And personally, I make mistakes towards the objective good, I think. I've been trying to do that, but it's been breaking me apart, and I need to kind of retreat from that a little bit personally and go into the subjective good a little bit for my own well-being, basically, and so on. And this video is basically me putting a pin in it and going, okay, this video might help other people and so on. And it's my experience of these things and so on. Yeah. You know, if you take the MB, like, there is a truth to be said towards anything not explicitly right-wing turns left-wing in the end, and that's not necessarily a good thing, but it's just the way the world works on some level, and it's sometimes okay. It can be finessed and managed and tolerated for some time and so on. The left sort of undermines the right, and the right overthrows the left, basically. And that's just a natural sort of fishtail, sort of driving in the middle of the road, but fishtailing on the left and right side and so on. And generally course correcting constantly so that you get to where you want to go in the end, basically. Because there is a destination on some level. And the thing is, like, once you figure this out, I think it's a lot easier to... and by the way, when I say left-wingers need to study Christianity, I'm saying they need to understand Christianity from the right-wing perspective. They need to understand it. And I don't mean like an abusive, like, I mean more like Andrew Clavin or something maybe. He's a good example of a Christian who is an artist or author or playwright and so on, who appreciates culture, and he likes art whether it's left or right. He tends to think the right has better art when they do make a good work, but he does enjoy left of center artwork and culture and so on a little bit when it's not slop, basically, when it's not woke. Um, yeah. So, yeah, he's an example of how a right winger might approach this problem, and a left winger might be someone like, I'm having a blank on that one. But he's the right-wing version of someone that incorporates leftist things that are legitimate in his view into his experience of the world to flesh out his natural right-wing disposition. And then, there's going to be objective truths to left and right concepts and so on some level. And there's also going to be subjective experiences on the right and left, respectively. But it's about maximizing general society through the individual expression of well-being and so on for everyone, or as many people as possible. You can't get them all, you can't win them all, or something like that. And that's one of the reasons why the be-all, end-all truth of everything for everyone forever kind of bullshit doesn't work, which returns to the point I was making earlier, which is it takes all kinds to make the world go round, but there is a legitimate right and wrong as well. And once you accept that, once you embrace the left and right dichotomies and so on, and you try and navigate them and so on, you will eventually master what it means to be truly yourself and so on, as long as you also hone your natural biases, strengths, and weaknesses and so on. So it's about fleshing out weaknesses and honing strengths. And, everything's going to get better, hopefully, across the board or nearly across the board. But you're going to always have certain areas where you're better at than everything else you can possibly do. And when people do that more and recognize that this is the way the world works and so on, then we will have a much better society. So that's my experience, that's my thoughts, and I hope I helped someone. And remember, it takes all kinds to make the world go round, but there is a legitimate right and wrong, good and evil. Be yourself at the same time. As they say, the glory of God is a human being fully alive. But you need to learn your proper limitations. Oh, right, and the other thing is, be whole, be yourself wholly, like be whole yourself, but also seek to order the good, the levels of good properly, external to yourself. So a whole person ordering the world properly is the glory of God as they're fully alive. And there is a legitimate functionality, life, goodness, death, dysfunctionality, and evil. But be yourself while doing it as much as possible, basically. Yeah. Ordered liberty versus anarcho-tyranny. There's a right and wrong way to go about all of this, and I think this video will express that maybe the left is more aligned with typically evil things a little bit more than the right is. But at the same time, that's just going to be how it is, being the natural terrain of the outliers and outcasts and so on. And that's not necessarily a value judgment from me at the moment. It kind of is, but it kind of isn't at the same time, because it's like the left just can't help but be what it is. But at the same time, that's what the left is supposed to be on some level as well. It's tragic in a sense, but it's also, like, one way of putting it is that the right-wing capitalists, Christians, will keep you alive, and the left-wing union artists will make you feel alive. So it's about survival and feeling whole, proper, edified on some level. And the combination of both, to the peak of both working in tandem, is the goal. So yeah,